EBA Voice, and here we are with Mr. Strootman. My name is Juliana Rojas. So, thank you for coming, Mr. Strootman.
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the United States. I grew up in the suburbs of St. Paul, just north of St. Paul. If you see any movies that talk about stereotypical suburbs, it's where I grew up. So a lot of homes were had similar styles. All the roads we had this main grid that went down into the main city. Kind of a typical suburban experience. Yeah, I did. I had quite a few role models. I was an athlete, so I had a lot of athlete role models, particularly basketball and football were my main sports. My father was always a role model. I had a very good relationship with my father. Even some of the older students in my school, there was two kids that were really just phenomenal athletes. And so they would letter in every sport, and then they went on to win some major events at the state track meet when they went to really nice universities. That always really good. Sure, yeah, actually there's a couple. Now one thing typical to Minnesota, it's known as the land of 10,000 lakes. And I think the actual number is closer to 15,000 lakes. But that's a lot of lakes. And my family, about an hour away from our home in the suburbs, we had what we call a cabin. And this was sort of an escape for the family. So on the weekends, we'd go up to the cabin. And probably the best memories that I have was playing on the cabin. Lots of trees, lots of nature, so I got to climb a lot. There was a lake, we had a boat, so I could go water skiing and tubing and kneeboarding. I was pretty good at that. So when I think back to my childhood, I typically think of those memories. Yeah, right. I come from a family of teachers, actually. So my grandma on my mom's side was the first teacher. She did it for a little while, and then she retired from that. And then my mom was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, and then I guess it's a third generation teacher. So it's in the family. When you know it, and when you grow up hearing the stories that my parents told, it's something you realize early on. Like either that sounds really good to me, or that doesn't sound good. For me, I thought teaching sounded like a lot of fun. For my sister, she wanted nothing to do with teaching. Yeah, well, there's a lot of levels to that because where I grew up in the suburbs of Minnesota, things were very stable, almost boring. It's probably my biggest criticism. Anyone who hears me talk about the suburbs, it's very boring, but very safe and just very routinized every single day, kind of the same thing. And then I was an educator in California for a while, and even those students had a drastically different life than I had. So not even a generation, but just moving location. And so there, we worked in a city called Chula Vista, and a lot of those students were Mexican. They'd come up over the border to San Diego for free education, and their life was drastically different. And now we're here in Maracaibo, Venezuela, and a lot of the things that I had in my childhood, you see it to some degree here, but the United States wasn't what Venezuela is now. There's not as much conflict. There were never any barricades. We never saw effigies of Maduro hanging from a light post or anything like that. No, actually. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm international now is because suburbs are safe, and maybe my parents would say they were happy that I grew up in an environment like that. But for me, probably the biggest criticism of myself is that I grew up a little bit isolated. I didn't really, I thought everywhere in the world was kind of like St. Paul, Minnesota. I thought all these places were safe and secure. And it made me dumb in some ways. And so for my kid, for Andy, I would love to see her be a little bit more worldly, to understand that the world is kind of a dangerous place. But you just me to make right decisions or good decisions very early on, because it's kind of a scary world. But my driver's license, like where I grew up in Minnesota, especially with a cabin, parents could easily get away with letting their kids learn to drive at a much younger age. So I think the first time I ever got behind the car and pushed the pedal with the steering wheel was probably 10 years old, driving my dad's minivan, and he just put me in the seat and said, "Here you go." So I was very confident getting my driver's license. I didn't think it was going to be
Did you
difficult.
drive before getting your driver's license?
I had driven. So there was a certain point on our way up to the cabin, my dad would stop, he would get out, we would switch spots, and I would drive the last mile to our cabin because there were never any policemen there, hardly any other cars, so that it was just a good time to practice. I had known from a very young age that I wanted to be a teacher, and I actually hesitated. I thought I would try a few other things first. I almost thought I wanted to be a school psychologist for a very brief period of time, but didn't like that because I knew I liked teaching better. And then I started making my way, or I dabbled in technology. I worked for a startup company in technology in San Diego because that's a very lucrative career. So if you work for the right company, you can make a lot of money, and it's a young crowd, and it's interesting stuff to work with. And those work days were really, really long. And I knew if I was going to have a family, I could not work that career and be in the tech industry at the same time. So I went back to what I had always wanted to do from the beginning, being a teacher, and here I am, now starting my family. I was kind of a jock. I describe myself as a jock. I was all about sports. I was one of those guys. But my parents, being teachers, were always talking about sort of the bigger world out there, really interesting things. And I always really enjoyed those conversations. And so, I guess I could just tell you the story. When I went to college, I became like a super intellectual. I thought I was so smart, and I had all these big ideas, and all I could talk about were these sort of esoteric ideas. And I was really intense, and all I wanted to do was talk about that. And then I graduated from college, and I went out into the real world, and I realized I couldn't really be like that. You can't go talk to your friends and have these super deep, intense conversations every single time. So I changed out of that, and I think I became just a little bit more regular and normal. And that was weird. That was weird of me. And like, who does that? Goes to college and like completely changes who they are. But that was me. So I've changed in that regard. Okay, well, I have one story, then I have one piece of advice. When I saw this piece of advice, I knew it was 100% correct. And I forget the guy's name, but he has something like 19 keys to being happy. He said his advice was marry the right person, and that one decision will determine 90% of your happiness. And so for me, that is definitely true. For people who don't want to get married, or that's just not on their radar, I don't really have advice for them. I don't know what would make them happy. So unfortunately for them, I'm sorry. But for people, probably my favorite story for about being successful in life was given to me in a book. And there's a book called Remember Who You Are. And there's a professor at the Harvard Business School. And he tells this one story to his graduating class every year. And it was a story about how when he was in college, he took a course on zoology about these animals. So he spent one semester learning about all these animals, their flight patterns, their mating habits, what they ate, the different types of species. I can't even use the proper words for it. And when it came time to take the final exam, the professor came out and he put on the table a bird, but it was a stuffed bird. It was dead. Okay, but on that bird was this bag, and that bag was covering up about 90% of that bird. So all you could see were the feet and a little bit of the feathers right below. And so that was the final exam for these students. And it seems like a really strange final exam, and it is. And he said, based on the information provided, tell us everything you know about this bird's flight patterns, mating habits, food habits, what it eats, where it lives, and if you can, tell us the genus and the species and the name of the bird. And they had 4 hours to write all this information in these little blue books. And so they were confused, like how would we even be able to do this? But the professor was preparing them more for life than he really did care about them answering the question about the bird, because life is all about limited information. These students had limited information to go on with this bird. They were looking at its feet and its feathers, and maybe there were more clues in just those tiny pieces of information than they realized. And I think that's what they did realize. Well, with feet like that, they're made for swimming, not necessarily for flying. And it's a thicker feather, so maybe they live in colder climates. Maybe that sounds like a bird not in this area. And I really love that story because that's exactly what life is. You never have all the facts. You'll never have everything that you need to move forward. So you have to use the information that you have, as limited as it may be, and make the best decision in the time and place that you're in. And to me, there's no better analogy for life than that right there. Because if you think you're going to have all the facts, and then I just need to do a little bit more research, I need to become a little bit more educated, I need to do this, you won't do anything with your life. You will just sit there and you'll keep reading, you'll keep researching, and you'll never take a risk yourself. But you just need to move ahead with the information you have. So that's